Hello and welcome along to the On the Whistle and Shirtless Plantain collaboration. We are reviewing the Africa Cup of Nations final, and wasn't it a classic with the Ivory Coast winning on home soil 2-1 against Nigeria Super Eagles. I'm the On the Whistle podcast host, say Nabi, and I'm privileged to say coach from the Shirtless Plantain show, and our man on the ground, Alistair Howarth, are joining me today. Lads, how are you doing the night before one of the best finals we've probably witnessed in African football history?
I'll go first because I'm sure Coach needs time. He's probably not finished morning after last night. Hey, Zane, I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I didn't get home until almost 4 a.m. last night from the stadium. I had loads of
Cry me a river, you're in Abidjan.
Hey, but let me tell you, I had so many people messaging me being like, "Oh, the atmosphere must be amazing. Send me videos of the parties and stuff." And I was saying, "What parties? I'm still at the stadium at 2:30 in the morning. Wait. The Ivorians didn't even come out until like 1 o'clock in the morning, and they. But Zane, let me tell you, what a pleasure, what an honor, what a tournament. I think I was so nervous yesterday because we'd had the best tournament in the history of this competition, and I was so worried that the final was going to be like almost not dead rubber is not the word, but a damp squid. Like, I think of the previous 10 finals, there have been 7 goals in this tournament. Like, this tournament, even when it provides shocks, entertainment, blah blah blah, the finals are almost always very, very tight, very, very boring, full of nothing in terms of incidents, goals, blah blah blah. Whereas last night was the first half, again, I was scared that Nigeria were going to get the 1-0 win, because for me as a neutral, that was the worst result. Just 1-0 Nigeria, shut the game down, kind of kill the game, just like they did the first time they played. But fortunately for me as a neutral, we got that equalizer, we got that brilliant winner. It was a game with controversy. I'm sure Coach will get into that. But it was an amazing end to the tournament, and the kind of end that we deserved in terms of the excitement, the atmosphere. And
before I bring Coach in, because he obviously has a vested interest here, but I've been practicing this question, so I've got to ask you it, Alistair. What was it like being in the Alassane Ouattara Stadium with Alassane Ouattara there?
Well, it was quite interesting. I've never seen a head of state be like one of the guys.
Like, you should have seen.
Yeah, before the trophy lift, Mr. Ouattara in his own stadium was like dancing and partying with the players. They were loving him. Like, it was amazing. The atmosphere was incredible. Ivorians, I used to always think that Congolese people were the most gifted musically in the world. Like, they were just born with the capacity to dance, to sing.
I can say that. Certainly not Nigerians.
But Ivorians, oh my goodness, it was just a huge party for like 2 hours just in the stadium. They had all these brilliant chants. My favorite chant of the Ivorians throughout the tournament has been this variations of essentially them chanting. The loose translation is, "We are useless, but we've qualified to the next round." And they've been singing this every tournament, every match. And last night, they were finally able to sing, we were worthless, but we're champions. And I think that summed it up perfectly, the environment. Just this kind of joy, unbridled joy that comes from the realization that they did not deserve to be there. They shouldn't have been there by all rights, and yet somehow they still were.
Well, listen, I think that is a perfect segue to Coach. And I remember watching, because I was watching from afar on the feed that was coming through. And obviously, we see the goal from Troost-Ekong. And then we see Kanu, the legend, the Arsenal man, the Super Eagle, standing up, dancing, looking so happy. And then as the game unfolds, they pan back to him. And there's this just desolate look, no dancing, no singing. What was it like for you, Coach, given you're an Arsenal fan who also loves the Super Eagles?
So first of all, I think my prediction of there being 3 goals in the final came to fruition. I just didn't think it would go against me. But I had a bad feeling, considering where Ivory Coast came from. Basically, the fact that they were we titled one of our podcasts "Back from the Dead." That's how finished Ivory Coast were. They were not supposed to be here at all, and I always had this sneaky feeling that they're just a team of destiny this tournament, and I was just hoping that we could potentially just just somehow spoil the party. But sometimes you can't fight fate. It was meant for them to win. That's just the bottom line. Regardless of how you want to spin it. Oh, I don't like this style of football. I prefer this style of football. Whatever, doesn't really matter because Ivory Coast were always going to win it. That was clear from day one. I think at this point because. Yeah, your best player scoring your opening goal of the tournament, and then the final goal of the tournament scored by someone who's survived testicular cancer. Like it is the perfect story. Regardless of how well Nigeria done, Nigeria unfortunately were just a side character in all of this. And I hate saying that because Nigeria are not a side character to anybody.
I got to ask you this, and we'll get to Haller's story because it's amazing, but. Were you happy with the way Pesero had set up? Because, I mean, it was talked about from early on, right?
Do you mean yesterday or just throughout the tournament?
Well, the final.
The final. Yeah, I was because I knew that we couldn't compete with them in midfield. We don't, there was interesting battles there, but ultimately they're just too good. They're just too good for us in midfield. So accepting who we are and what we are as a team. Any good team that's worth their salt knows exactly what their strengths and weaknesses are. Had we persisted with that 4-3-3, we'd probably go out in the second round or in the quarterfinals because we don't have the capabilities of sustaining that type of football. What Nigeria do have the capabilities of is suffocating teams and taking a sting out of games and taking our chances, and that's what's got to the final. So I had no issues with that. My main issue was because of how badly we got stung in the semi-finals by playing high. But not actually pressing. Pesero's gone the opposite direction now and played really, really deep. And Osimhen is completely and utterly isolated. So we've given more of the game to Ivory Coast, which again, conceded possession Ivory Coast is not a bad thing. It's just that we wasn't clever with it and we didn't snap at them in midfield as much as we should have. We looked leggy and we looked kind of out of ideas. And that's what annoyed me more than anything. The setup itself to me was fine. It was just the way we actually carried it out. That's what annoyed me.
Well, let me ask this question nice and open. Ali, where was the game won or lost for you?
I think it was lost from a Nigerian perspective in the beginning of that second half. So, I think there was some question marks over some of the selections coming into the game. I think the biggest one was Chukwueze. I really don't know why he started when Moses Simon has had a very good tournament. It didn't make any sense to me. But I think, and even Pesero admitted it himself, is he said he didn't change anything about the team until they were losing 2-1. But, for me, the first half of this game followed the pattern of the first Nigeria-Cote d'Ivoire game to the T. Cote d'Ivoire dominating possession, not creating many clear-cut chances. Nigeria looking quite comfortable defending, not being very creative going up front. But they find a way to score. Justukong scores, from a set piece again, this time, whatever corner, not a penalty. But if in the second half, I think it almost felt like Pesero had forgotten that Ivory Coast this time had Adingra and Aller. And so I think for me, that is where he went wrong because, and this is crazy to say, but because I think over the tournament, Olaina has been by far and away the best right back at this tournament. He's been brilliant. But last night, he was being torn to shreds by Adingra the whole game. And every time Adingra would stand him up. And that's what I love about Adingra is you saw him compared to...
one duel. He won one duel the entire game. I remember him winning one duel and that was it. The rest of it was all Adingra.
And that's what I love about Adingra is unlike... And you could see the difference between him and a Chukwueze, a Lookman, a Gradel is all the other guys, they kind of stand up defenders... And then they kind of, whether it's a step over, they try and jink inside, they try and do... Adingra, he stands up a player and he immediately bursts past them. And every time, he almost did the exact same thing to Aina every time. Got the ball, looked like he was going to come inside, stood him up, and then immediately went to the byline. Because, although he's right-footed, he could play on his left. And he absolutely tore him to shreds. So for me, that was where the game was lost. It was very, very clear that Cote d'Ivoire had the pressure. It was very, very clear that, unlike the time before, it wasn't just aimless crosses into a Crasso or a Boga or whoever was playing in that first game. It was Adingra and Aller were the ones actually being threatening. So for me, Pesero had to make changes early in the second half other than bringing Simon on. But he needed to bring on, I don't know, say Samuel or someone, take off Ajayi and bring on a more mobile center back to help out Aina. Like he needed to make some kind of change because Adingra was just having so much space, getting so much joy. So I think for me, that's where the game was lost. Is Peseiro has shown that he's brilliant at setting up a defensive unit. He's brilliant at creating a kind of a functional team that for tournament football, that's perfect. It's exactly what you want. And for the most part in this tournament, he's had an Osimhen who has been able to create chances from virtually nothing. And that's been the difference for Nigeria. Whereas last night, you could see the tournament finally caught up with him. You know, the injuries, the knocks. You know, that guy feels like he's playing with one leg and he's still the best striker at the tournament. But it finally caught up to him. And it felt like when Osimhen couldn't create everything by himself, couldn't bring in Lookman, couldn't do everything like that, Nigeria didn't have anything. And that's for me where Peseiro has let himself down and Nigeria down, is particularly in the second half. He didn't make the changes that were needed.
Can I ask though? I mean, with Osimhen didn't have the best of games yesterday, but I feel like it was such a fine margin because it felt as if a lot of the duels that he got into yesterday, in games gone by, the referee just lets the game go on. And it seemed as if every time he got in front of the defender, the whistle just went every time. And those are opportunities where he's won the ball and essentially he can turn and face the defense. Somebody's running off him, he can play into space. And every time the whistle didn't go, Lookman, Chukwueze, or Simon got the ball in space and were able to run at their man. It just felt as if those happened so few times. It just felt as if there was a stricter line of what they would give yesterday than any other part of the tournament, and not just for Osimhen, for other players. I remember particularly in this South Africa game as well, Evidence was going nuts, and I loved big strong strikers, you know, bodying their centre backs, and it seems as if, you know, they were letting it go, and then in the final it was the opposite, almost like, oh well, no, we can't, you know, that's almost too rough, when it's like the entire tournament has been the opposite of that. The game's been flowing, the referee's been great. And, you know, Nigeria didn't deserve to win yesterday, but if I'm being honest, I think they not only did Nigeria save their worst performance of the tournament for the final, I think so did the referee as well, to be honest. Like, it just felt as if there was something changed. And, you know, thank God there was no need for VAR yesterday as well, but it genuinely just felt like something changed. But do you know what? I actually want to go back to your point about where Nigeria lost the game. I also feel as if when he made when he was making changes, tactically, all he could have done was told our right winger, whoever it was at the time, drop 10 yards. Even if you're not going to double up on Adingra, just make sure that when he gets the ball, his angles are cut off. That's all you really have to do, really. But the fact that that didn't even happen, I was like, okay, cool. I had a feeling this is where the game would go, because good football teams get the ball to their best players consistently, and good football teams stop that happening, and Nigeria didn't stop that happening, unfortunately. So I have no real complaints, you know. But Peseiro himself, you know, the fact that he's really honest and humble about how the game went, kind of thing, I genuinely do think it's a good sign, because he was honest and humble enough to change the system after the first game as well. So it's clear that it's a sign that somebody that knows, you know, the strengths and weaknesses of this team, and also strengths and weaknesses of himself. It's just a bit disappointing that it all kind of caught up with them yesterday more than anything.
Well, I was going to say, we've spoken a lot about Peseiro and some of the changes that he made or didn't make. But when we look at Emerson Faye, who's come in as the interim manager of the Ivory Coast, one would imagine he's done enough to get the job, even though he's got no experience, really, for such a high-profile position. But on the BBC commentary that I was watching, there were a lot of calls, particularly midway through the second half, to substitute Aller and Adingra. A lot of the commentators feeling that they were slow, sluggish, Aller specifically clutching his leg. In the end, his faith in Aller specifically paid off, and we've spoken about Adingra and the threat he was made. I mean, watching it in the stadium, Alistair, did you get a sense that it was risky to keep Aller on as long as he did?
Yeah, honestly, yeah, I did. I remember thinking that same, not Adingra, because actually I remember specifically when Diakite came on, is I was like saying to the guy next to me, like, he has to come on for Gradel, not a Dinger. You have to keep a Dinger on. You have to keep a Dinger on. But Allaire, yeah, I said that. I really wanted him to come off. I thought he wasn't providing anything. He looked so tired. But like kind of as Coach alluded to earlier, with strikers at that elite level, the margins are so fine. Even if you're having a bad game, even if you can't contribute, they have the ability to do that. No one else on that pitch, bar Osimhen, I think has the now kind of striker's instinct to finish how Allaire did. And if he had come off, Jean-Philippe Picasso, he's done a decent job, but he's not scoring that goal. He's not finding that half yard of space, that clever little touch to find the net. And no, yeah, I think, obviously I wasn't listening to any commentary, but I think they're spot on in terms of bringing off Allaire. I thought he needed to come off. I thought there was no way he could keep going, and he wasn't going to offer anything. And yet, when it mattered most, he did. And even the other chances, he almost scored that brilliant bicycle kick. Like that's what someone like him provides. And same with Osimhen. The difference is that Cote d'Ivoire were able to get the ball into the box. We're able to create half chances that Allaire could make something of, whereas Nigeria weren't able to. But yeah, no, I think and that's always going to be, the wonderful thing about football is like, sometimes coaches make the wrong decision and it pays off. Sometimes they make the right decision and it doesn't pay off. That's the beautiful thing about the sport, is that variability, that kind of chaos, that how sometimes it's out of your hand. And so I think, but I do think that Allaire should have come off, and it shows both how me and the BBC commentary team were made to
Well, let's stay on Allaire for a second, because I know, Coach, you mentioned earlier his inspirational story. A year ago, he was recovering from testicular cancer, comes back, makes a comeback for Dortmund, makes a comeback for the Ivory Coast, and scores one of the sweetest winners you can imagine. I mean, this is an inspirational story in a team that had so much dysfunction at the start of the tournament, but found a way to be functional and found a way to win.
Yeah. When we talk about teams of destiny, throughout football history, club sides, international sides, you can name loads. Like, you can go all the way back to the year 2004. There was two. There was Porto, there was Greece. There was Porto in the European Championships. There was Porto in the Champions League. There was Greece in the European Championships. You come a bit more recently, 2016, the Euros, Portugal. That Portugal side was terrible, to be honest, but they found a way. Throughout football history, there's always a team that, no matter what the odds are against them, Leicester in 2016 as well, no matter what the odds are, they just find a way. They find a way. On Valentine's Day 2016, Arsenal beat Leicester and 2 points behind them. Leicester go and win 8 or 9 games in a row, 1-0 or something like that, and essentially wins in the league. Sometimes there's certain things that you cannot deny, and Ivory Coast and Hull were not to be denied this tournament at all. Best possible start, followed by 2 losses, and then they sacked their coach. And then you're thinking, hold on a second, how is this going to pan out? The moment they got through their round of 16, I was like, all right, they 100% get to the final. I remember I spoke to someone and they were like, oh, I'm really, really glad that Morocco and Angola are out. I was like, on the other side of the draw, that's probably where the winner will be. And the other side of the draw was Congo and Ivory Coast. And I had a feeling that had Congo beat Ivory Coast, I wouldn't have wanted to face them. I wouldn't have wanted to face Ivory Coast either. But one of those two, to me, were the teams to get through, because Congo got to the semis with winning only 1 game, right? That's something to be worried about. And then Ivory Coast, we've mentioned as well. Again, the circumstances they managed to find themselves in to get to the semis as well. When you're a team of destiny, nothing is going to go against you. Like, you're going to win. Like I said, Nigeria played their part. Showing that look where there's life in this team. Some old heads, some young heads, and whatnot. But ultimately, it was probably just a step too far. And then on top of that, you add Haller's story to Ivory Coast's already amazing story, and it's almost like, how can they lose? It's almost impossible. I think the only 2 games he played this tournament was the semis and the final, right? If I remember correctly.
The only 2 started, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. There's nothing more you can really say about this tournament. Like there's so many underlying narratives and stories and whatnot that it's almost like he could have easily not played that semi as well and only played the final. It would have went the exact same way. You know, it's just he was not to be denied. And from a personal standpoint, I'm absolutely heartbroken. But as someone that's that's dealt with that has people around him that have survived cancer as well, I couldn't be happy for him. I genuinely couldn't be happy for him. I think he's not only is his story just inspirational to people that have survived cancer, but it's inspirational to absolutely anybody. Like that, no matter the circumstances, you never know what tomorrow is going to bring. Like he just kept on going. He just kept on going, and he's arguably given like the biggest day in Ivorian history in the last God knows how many years. I'm a loss for words, honestly. I might actually consider writing a little story about this because there's so many narratives that's gone with this story. It's ridiculous, honestly.
Well, I'll keep us moving because Haller is obviously an inspirational part of it. But let me make this case to you. We have seen success with teams when they've changed managers. Sometimes when it's looked like it's not the most well thought out decisions. If you're a Chelsea fan, you've won the Champions League with Roberto Di Matteo and Thomas Tuchel, both, if I'm correct, coming at a time where they were changed in the middle of a season. Zinedine Zidane started his dynasty at Real Madrid, coming in midway through a season and then winning 3 on the bounce. And with Emerson Faye, you have the situation where in his debut, they beat Senegal on penalties. Then they go on to knock out Mali in the quarterfinals, who were one of the formed teams. DRC might not have the name of a superpower on the continent, but when you look at that workman squad, one of the hardest teams to beat. And then, of course, they get it back and they beat Nigeria, who, of course, they lost to. I want to just get some thoughts on the interim manager. Is this his success? Does he deserve any credit? Is this player-led? And what is the future? Give me your raw thoughts, guys. Coach, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll just mention just one point because I think it is probably what essentially won them the tournament. It's the fact that Gasquet didn't start Seri. And I remember in our preview pod, and on our first pod, Alistair, we spoke about the fact that they have so much midfield depth and Seri isn't starting at all. The moment Seri comes into the team, their whole attack changes because he's able to get the ball into their forwards and into their better players so easily, effortlessly, in fact. And that wasn't the case in the group stages at all. And it baffled me that Gasquet didn't actually start him at all. So Faye recognized that straight away. And it almost feels as if that he almost knew these players better than Gasquet. That's why he was like, okay, looking at the composition of my team, looking at what I have available, who's the player that can actually change the trajectory of this team? I have Sangare, I have Fofana, I have the guy that scored the equalizer. I've forgotten his name. Oh my gosh, Kessié. I have Kessié. None of these players are in any way, shape, or form similar to Seri. So he's essentially our trump card, and he's the wild card basically here, despite his style of play being the exact opposite. And then that's why you could have the midfield rotations of Sangare starting some games or Kessié starting some games, kind of thing. And it really made life difficult for teams. How are they going to line up? How are Ivory Coast going to line up? That was a masterstroke and the main difference between them pre-Faye and post Gasquet basically.
I think it's obviously it's so hard to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes in a national team and know what the relationships are like. But one thing that you got a sense of is, and this was a big question mark for Côte d'Ivoire coming into this tournament, and probably the biggest stick to beat them with was, we've spoken about this so much on this podcast that over the last 5 years we've seen this amazing emergence of African coaches flying the continent's flags so high, led by Aliou Cissé, Jamal Belmadi. Obviously we've had on the club side of things, Pitso Mosimane is a good friend of the podcast, and he has done so much in terms of breaking barriers, shattering glass ceilings for, Black and Sub-Saharan African coaches, both on the continent and abroad. And one of the things that you spoke to with people ahead of the tournament was around this Cote d'Ivoire team was, there were question marks. Gassé has never coached on the continent, and we've spoken about this time and time again. Even Radi Jaidi, when he came onto the podcast just before the tournament, was talking about this, how he's saying, look, it doesn't matter if you're from the continent. And he was speaking specifically about players who were kind of Tunisian, but born in France, in England, wherever. And he said, but you have to have experience on the continent. You have to have games under your belt, and Gassé didn't. And there's also a sense that Emers Faye, as kind of coach alluded to, that he has a connection with these players that Gassé never had. And, and it's not hard to understand that Gassé is kind of I don't want to kind of besmirch him too much, but he's a very old French guy who's been kind of airdropped into this team to take charge of them. Whereas Emers Faye is a former player, someone who's coached a lot of young players. He spent his entire career coaching at Nice, Montpellier, in the youth sides, and then taking over, for the Ivorian team. He knows what it means to play for Cote d'Ivoire. He's been to a final and lost it with Cote d'Ivoire, and he, so many times in press conferences, that's what the questions were about. It was, Emers, you weren't able, you had to cut your career short, so you weren't able to be a part of the 2015 team that won the AFCON. You were part of the what was it, 2010, 2008, the team that lost on penalties. You've suffered this. What does it mean for you to play? And so he's able to connect with the players in a way that Gassé was never able to. He's able to, and he spoke so much about kind of looking in the mirror, looking at ourselves. What have we done wrong? How can we improve? A lot of introspection. And even like Kessié spoke a lot about that as well. Edinger spoke about it, how this team kind of had to look at themselves, had to, essentially pick themselves up from nothing. And I don't think Gassé could have done that if he had stayed. I think Emers Faye was the one who's done that. Look, is Emers Faye a great coach? Is he a great tactician? We don't know yet. Maybe he is. Maybe he'll become a brilliant coach. We won't know based off this tournament, because what's carried this team to the end of the tournament is brilliant man management, is inspirational coaching. It's not tactics. And for that, he has been the difference maker. Yeah, sorry, coach.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, although we don't know, if you'll be a great tactician or all those kind of things, I feel like a lot of those things are overstated. Great coaches and great managers at a base level understand what their best play, in general, understand what their players' strengths and weaknesses are
100%.
in relation to others. So I'll give a really easy example here. If you're a Man City coach, you're not going to start Grealish. You're not going to start Grealish, Alvarez, and Nunez all together, basically, because there's everybody there essentially wants to provide more than they want to score. Even though Alvarez is a really good finisher kind of thing, their first instinct is to be more, drop back a little bit kind of thing. Now, the moment you add someone like Haaland into the mix, now straight away, then you drop one of those players kind of thing. So that's a very basic example, right? So if you extrapolate that to Ivory Coast now, again, the point I made before, automatically he recognized, okay, I haven't got a Dingra fit, so who am I actually going to play? Who's the most similar player there? He started Pepe, I think, one game, but really and truly, he relied on the 36-year-old Max Gradel, because he's someone that, who can go in and out, basically, even though he's 36 years old. And if I go in and out, who can I cross the ball to? Okay, Haller's fit now, so okay, I'm going to start him as well. It's just understanding that those relationships between your players kind of thing. And that, to me, is a very good... If I'm an Ivorian fan, I'm thinking that's a very good sign. Someone that understands straight away strengths and weaknesses of these players. A lot of these coaches in these tournaments, all they do is kind of just play like who's the best player. Who can help me the most, rather than understanding who can actually help each other. Same way Pastero got us to the final by essentially going to a 3 at the back, because he realised our centre backs are all great in a 3, but in a 2 they're absolutely pants. No disrespect to our players, but Ekong is a fantastic centre back in a 3. He's the best player in the tournament in a 3, but in a 2 he looked very, very funny. So it's just understanding those relationships, and Faye, to me, from the outset, understood those relationships almost straight away.
Well, listen, lads. We're going to get to your teams of the tournament in a second, but before we go down that path, I just want to ask both of you a question, and we'll start with you, Alistair. Where to for the Ivory Coast from here? The World Cup's coming up. We have the tournament in 2 years' time in Morocco. Where to? Where do they go? What? If you look in your crystal ball, do you see? And coach, off the back of that, maybe you pick up for the Super Eagles and you sort of tell us where they go from here.
I think, well, as someone who is in the same World Cup qualifying group as Cote d'Ivoire, they're in Kenya's World Cup qualifiers, I got to say Cote d'Ivoire will have no problems qualifying for the World Cup. It should be a very easy ride for them. But yeah, I think I think this is something we need to discuss further along the line is what this AFCON has done is it's actually also thrown up a lot of possibilities for the World Cup qualifier, because a lot of the big hitters who would have been in those first seeds are suddenly in a position where they have to play some of these smaller teams that could give them a real run for their money. You know, Nigeria in the same group as South Africa, Cape Verde and Angola are in the same group as Cameroon. You know, like these teams can give them a run for their money. Cote d'Ivoire, I think, is different because they have a very, in my opinion, quite an easy World Cup qualifying group. Their biggest challengers, Gabon, and then Kenya. And so, as much as I love Kenya, that we're not going to trouble them. They're going to. I think they should walk that group easily. And I think what that does is that allows Cote d'Ivoire, with that easier group, is to try and build something, because we talk about all the time on this podcast and when talking about international football about cycles, about building things. And Cote d'Ivoire, as much as, you know, say Allaire and Max Gradel were their most kind of perhaps iconic players from this tournament, certainly in this country, and players like Kessié, this team has a lot of very, very good young players. I mean, you think about the center backs they've got: Evan Ndika, 24, Kosanu's like 22, Diomande is 20. You know, Wilfred Zingo at right back, 22 as well. You know, Simon Adingra is going to be there for another decade. They've got Karim Konate coming through as one of the most exciting center forwards in Europe at Salzburg. David Datro Fofana kind of at Chelsea. You know, they have the pieces to build something over the next 2-3 years until that World Cup, and to build something really special. And so for me, that's where the coaching is going to be so important, because this is where, you know, there's no way that if Emers Faye wants to stay, they won't give him the job, because he's earned that. He is the most popular man in this country. I can tell you that even before the kickoff of the match, when they were announcing the players, the team sheets, Emers Faye got a bigger cheer than everyone else. And so he will be given this coaching job unless he refuses it. And so that is where this is going to be the big question, because if he can show that he is someone like a Aliou Cissé, and even if he's not as tactically gifted, we've seen other FAs like Senegal bringing in, I can't remember who's the French guy they have, but like bringing in assistant coaches who are more tactically astute, you know, than the head coach. So even if Emers Faye isn't that brilliant coach, and he is just a brilliant man manager, a brilliant guy who manages the players, if they can bring the team around him to build this cycle going up to 2026, because even 2026, you think Kessié, it might be a bit too late for Jean-Michel Seri, I think, but Kessié, Fofana, they'll both be 31, I think. They'll both be early 30s, still looking really good and sharp. This is a team that for me can be one of those teams like Morocco that goes far in a World Cup. They've got time to build up. So there's a lot of question marks still. But I think for me, this Ivorian team has the building blocks to build. I'll let Coach speak about Nigeria, but I think it is interesting with like I alluded to, is we've now got this funny situation where we don't know when the next AFCON is going to be, because it's scheduled to be in the summer of 2025 in Morocco. Unfortunately, as is often the case with African planning, well, if I say African CAF's planning, Dr. Patrice Motsepe will probably give in to Gianni Infantino, his good pal, and because the Club World Cup is also in the summer in 2025, I think the AFCON will probably be moved to 2026 in the early year, like January, the normal time we have AFCON. But that presents us with this really interesting scenario where within the next 2 years, essentially, we have to do 2 sets of qualifiers for the World Cup and for the AFCON. Going to be a lot of competitive football, a lot of must-win games for a lot of these big countries. So there's not going to be the space to build squads in a way that you might be able to if you have friendlies to bring in these young players. And so for me, it's still going to be what are the teams that can build the best squads into the AFCON and then into the World Cup. And for me, those are still the teams like Senegal, like Morocco. But this Ivorian team is really special, and I think they could build into something.
I suppose, look, from from a Nigerian perspective, I'm looking at the players that didn't go to the AFCON this year and their ages, and Nigeria left something in the tank. My biggest worry is our centre backs and our centre midfielders, because into our whole defence, actually, I think we've found a solid goalkeeper. Genuinely, I think Noah Bali has surprised a lot of people, and I feel like, especially for tournament football, a big presence like that, who's eccentric, who can make big saves and stuff like that, and he's actually quite good with his feet as well. I think he's absolutely fine. But now we're looking at someone like Aina. Aina will still be a good defender for us in 2-3 years' time. I have no doubt about that. But then our left back issue, there are some names that are floating about, but they're unproven. At centre back, Ekong is going to be what, by the next AFCON, he's going to be 32. He should still be fine, but again, you mentioned before that he wasn't even sure if he was going to make this AFCON squad. So again, there's still those uncertainties. Nigeria's biggest assets obviously are our attackers, but I don't feel like that should be what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on how do we get the ball to those attackers and who do we include in our squads. I'm perfectly fine with Pesero carrying on for the World Cup qualifiers, because I feel like he's got credit in the bank now. Nobody gave us a chance to even make it up, to essentially make it to the knockout stages, I'd say, in this AFCON, and we made it all the way to the final with the best defensive record. So clearly he's a good coach. Taking us to the next level, I'm not 100% sure yet, but again, he was literally one game away from winning us an AFCON, our first AFCON in 11 years. So who's to say that, the next time he might go all the way. The style of football isn't the prettiest. It's not Nigerian heritage. It's not expansive and flamboyant. But again, it's about adapting to your squad. If you don't have the likes of Okocha and Kanu and Babangida, sorry, all the, Finidi George, all these flair players kind of thing, you don't try to play that way. You just don't. So yeah, look, overall, in terms of what Nigeria do going forward, I'm at a very, very positive space. When you exceed expectations, you set a new baseline, you set a new benchmark, and it's kind of hard to revert from that. Expectations have now changed. So now a lot of people, for example, that might be thinking about, do I switch allegiances to Nigeria and whatnot? They might be thinking, wow, look at Lookman. Lookman, nobody really thought he'd be the main man for Nigeria. Now look at him. Same thing for someone like Iwobi. Same thing for someone like Ola Aina. There's a lot of players in the diaspora that maybe like having second thoughts now. By the time we come around for the next AFCON, we may have some really top players that we didn't even consider that could be Nigerian. That could play for us. So I guess we have to wait and see. But as a Nigerian, I'm very, very proud of this team. I'm just bitterly disappointed, but that's football. Somebody has to lose, somebody has to win.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to the teams of the tournament, I'll offer you two thoughts. One, can you imagine what it feels like to be Wilfred Zaha?
Just I don't even know what to say.
You know what I mean? He could have been the man. He could be one of the players who turned it around had he just been more committed to the team. So say the Ivory Coast team. Of course, I'm simplifying what could be seen as a complex storyline. And secondly, as a South African, I leave the tournament with more optimism than maybe I had before. And I know, Ali, you'll tell me I should have the optimism because of the consistency that Hugo Bruce has brought. But, until we're tested in big occasions, you don't know how it will happen. And, I suddenly have more confidence against Nigeria in the qualifiers. That maybe we won't beat them, but maybe we can take some points off them and they can drop elsewhere, and our qualification could come into being. I will let you lads break through your teams of the tournament. You can fight over who goes first. I'll just say that if none of you pick Ronwen Williams in goal, you guys are one-eyed Kenyan and Nigerian fans.
Sorry, who is that name? Ronwen? I don't know who this guy is.
Go on, give me your team, brother.
All right, so teams of the tournaments are always so difficult because football is so defined by moments, and there's so much recency bias, so it's hard to judge someone who had a brilliant group stage but then gets knocked out in the knockouts, then kind of is he a player of the tournament? So for me, goalkeeper, yeah, no question, Ronwen Williams. I think Mobali had pushed Ronwen for it up until the final, but I actually think Mobali had a pretty bad game in the final. I think particularly that Kessié header was really poor goalkeeping. But even if Nigeria had won, unless Noah Bali kind of pulled off an amazing kind of string of saves again, I think for me it would have been Ronwen class above. I think right back, as I kind of alluded to earlier in the tournament, I think Olaina was by far and away the best right back at this tournament. But I have to be honest, I think in this one game, Simon Adingra kind of ruined his credentials as the player of the tournament. Because I know in terms of being a great player over the course of the tournament, is important. But as I said, it comes down to these moments. And in the biggest game for Nigeria, Olaina was, for me, probably their worst player, and Adingra took him to pieces. So I think for me, Mudau kind of edges it because I think Mudau was far more solid. He wasn't as much of an attacking threat, but he kind of contributed to South Africa's football in so many brilliant ways. I think my center backs, look, Troost-Ekong, best player of the tournament for me, both defensively and up front. He's brilliant player, brilliant servant for Nigeria, brilliant captain, wonderful in the media.
Way better than people give him credit for.
I agree. And even last night in the mixed zone, stopped and spoke longer than anyone, including the Ivorians, even in defeat. Really gracious guy. The center back next to him, I went with Logan Costa from Cape Verde. I felt like there weren't any of the final four teams. There weren't any center backs that really jumped out at me. I think some were good, but none. Whereas Logan Costa for Cape Verde had a brilliant tournament. Him and Pico Lopez were a brilliant duo. Costa also showing kind of his ball playing capacity. So for me, Logan Costa had to be alongside Troost-Ekong. Left back was a bit of a tough one, but I think in the end I went for Arthur Masuaku. Really, really good tournament for me. Very solid defensively, and particularly his corners, his set piece delivery was excellent. His only blemish was missing a penalty, but in the end it didn't matter in the penalty shootout against Egypt. And I never try and hold penalty shootouts against players too much. So I think for me he was there. I went with the midfield three. Teboho Mokoena was there. Fantastic performance from him. That free kick alone kind of will live in memory for so long. And I know he missed a couple penalties, but only, the penalty in the third place playoff, I don't really care about. The only blemish for me was that missed penalty in the shootout against Nigeria. But even in that game, he scored a penalty in normal time. Was fantastic. Alongside him, I had Frank Kessié. Again, he speaks for himself, kind of man of the match in the semi-final, scores the equalizer in the final, scores the equalizer in the game against Senegal. Brilliant performance from him. And I also added Freddie from Angola. I think, again, it was hard for me to find a third midfielder, and I thought Freddie was, without him, Angola wouldn't have got out the group. Without him, Angola wouldn't have got to the quarterfinals. Particularly his double assist in the round of 16 against Namibia was fantastic. I think he was a brilliant midfielder. Wingers for me, Ademola Lookman, brilliant tournament. Excellent for Nigeria. Scored the important goals when Aussie men couldn't. So I think for me, he had to be there. And obviously, although he didn't play as much football, Simon Adingra was magnificent, game changer in all of the knockout matches, whether he was starting, whether he was coming off the bench. And for me, up front was probably the hardest one, because if he had got past the round of 16, Emilio Nsue for me was the best striker in terms of performance, but he also missed the most important penalty of his in Equatorial Guinea's tournament. If he had scored that and they got to the round of 16, for me, he would have definitely been there. And so I have to go with, as crazy as this is, a one-goal man in Victor Osimhen. Because for me, if Osimhen wasn't playing, Nigeria would have been potentially even knocked out in the groups. They wouldn't have beat Cote d'Ivoire because he won that penalty. They probably wouldn't even have beat got the draw against Equatorial Guinea. And he dragged them through these games. Against South Africa, he won the penalty that put them in the lead. He was immense. So for me, as weird as it is to say, the striker with only one goal for me was the striker of the tournament.
Yeah. All right, Coach, would you agree? How does your team shape up compared to Alistair's? Very
Honestly,
different.
it's actually quite compelling, some of these arguments, but mine is based purely on, I suppose, impact overall. So some of these impacts to the team, but some of these selections might seem a bit wild in general. But I think you're gonna hate me for the first one, but Noah Bali for me is the goalkeeper of the tournament, and not because I think he was.
I dislike Chipper United. I think more than you because I know that you're supporting Nigeria. Yeah, I mean, jeez,
So,
one-eyed super eagle. Yeah, go on.
I'm so sorry, but do you know what it is for me? It's moments combined with the overall impact. Look, after he got injured, I forgot what game it was in. It might have been in the group stages where he got injured. The entire country paused for him. You know, journalists were asking, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you gonna be ready for our next game?" Because we knew we have someone in him. You know, who's a calm head, who's a shot stopper, who can actually launch attacks. The amount of times he found Osimhen on his chest from 60 yards, 70 yards was actually unreal. You know, those things matter. And then in our biggest moment, even though I think he was at fault for the first goal yesterday, but in our biggest moment in the semi-final, you know, he saved 2 penalties against somebody who saved 4 penalties in the last round. It was just such a huge moment, you know. At right back, I think nobody can have any disagreements. Me and somebody that on my timeline were actually laughing at the fact that, you know, Aina's in the running to be a player of the tournament just purely on a vibes perspective. You know, he's so good on the ball and whatnot, but genuinely he was just very good. Yesterday was much like Nigeria in general. We saved his worst performance for the final. I think he's just been very solid, and the fact that he played left back this tournament as well, again, that versatility helping Nigeria get through games and manage games just by being versatile. Second centre back would be Kusunu. Again, watched him for Leverkusen as well, and he just carried his form through. I think he's probably going to end up being the best African centre back, you know, very soon. I think he's a top quality player of the tournament. Obviously, Ekong. I'm not being funny. I never got to watch Baresi at a big level. You know, I'm sure you did, Zayn. You know, you're a little bit older than me. But I'm not being funny. I don't think Baresi was this good, personally. I can't see how Baresi was this good. I don't think he's ever put together.
Big. That's very big.
I'm joking, obviously, but I think in terms of impact, I don't think there was a more impactful player this tournament. Again, I mentioned he was probably our shortest player in our defense, but he was a giant in the air and on the ball. You know, he was when we did use our midfield, he was finding passes into them pretty easily. You know, he was so good. Left back Masaku. When I watched him at West Ham, I was like, this player, I would love to have him in my 7-a-side team or 5-a-side team because he's just so good on the ball. And then you watch him for Congo, and he's one of their playmakers. Essentially, he's one of the people that starts their attacks and whatnot. You know, that goal he scored from the free kick was deliberate because he did it against Chelsea as well. You know, he's a very clever and technically sound player. I think he's just fantastic. I've mentioned Seri so many times. I'm not going to mention him anymore because it is what it is. He just deserves to be in the team of the tournament. He changed the trajectory of this Ivory Coast team so much. You know, different profile to their regular midfield three, and he helped them loads. You know, organising as well as his passing. Kessié, again, big moments. He didn't start every single game. You know, he played his role, but every time he was called upon, he helped. He helped loads, absolute loads. And obviously, he speaks for himself. In the final, you scored equaliser. Mokoena, dead ball specialist, superb passer, and an organizer as well. Everything that South Africa did good in that team came through him. All of the passing combinations, relieving pressure, calming the game down. He was just so impressive. My first forward, again, a 4-3-3. Ademola Lookman, 3 goals. He's helped revive the big man, little man strike partnership. He would put it like this. I don't think I know we spoke about Osimhen's impact. You know, Nigeria might not have made it out of the group, but generally speaking, who's going to put the goals away? Who would have put the goals away? You know, these things are super important. So for me, absolutely yes to the tournament. Mabalulu, for his finish alone, deserves to be in that tournament. Deserves to be in the tournament. But in general as well, when a team like Angola are, you know, impressed everyone kind of thing, and nobody can really pick, you know, who their best player is kind of thing, to me, he's the one that stood out personally for me. He looked like the man. And despite them obviously coming up short against Nigeria, again, I still think he was fantastic for sure. And up front, I'm gonna go with Osimhen, and not because, again, you know, he scored the most goals or whatnot. In Sue, for me, I always judge strikers and, you know, especially pure number nines and how many goals they score. But if you score all these great goals in the group stages and whatnot, and then when it matters most, you don't contribute, to winning a penalty or creating a goal kind of thing. It's kind of hard for me to overlook that. And despite him scoring, being the top scorer kind of thing, Osimhen battered every single centre back he came up. I'm sure if you ask every single centre back this tournament, who did they hate playing against the most, it's going to be Osimhen across the board. Even if they didn't play against him, I'm glad they didn't play against him because he would be giving me a bad day. So that's my team of the tournament. Again, I'm looking back at the goalkeeper. It's hard for Ronwen to miss out, but Noabali just ends it for me. But yeah.
Sorry, took me a little while to come off mute. Button was stuck. But listen, those are fantastic debates, discussions, and teams. And listen, if you're listening out there to either the On the Whistle podcast or the Shirtless Plantain podcast, please go comment. Tell us if you agree with Alistair. Tell us if you agree with Coach. Tell us if you disagree. I know I disagree because Ronwen Williams should be in goals. I know that Nsu should be the starting striker, and I think that Alistair and Coach are too harsh on him on one game because the man delivered. Listen, come in. Let us know what you think. OTW_podcast on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah.
Find us on Facebook and YouTube at OTW_podcast, or just search for the On the Whistle podcast. Coach, if people want to reach out to the Shirtless Plantain, what handle should they hit you guys up on?
So on Twitter, it's the Plantain Show. On TikTok, it's the same. On Instagram, it's the same. Hit us up, comment, like, subscribe, share with your friends and whatnot, especially to the majority of our listeners, which are in America. The World Cup's coming soon, right? You want to get involved in football. You want to get involved in football. Share this podcast with them. You're going to learn a lot.
And listen, Coach, and maybe Ali should get the final word here. It's been absolutely amazing to just collaborate with you guys. We really enjoyed it. We hope it's something that, as we continue to build our platform and focus on African football, our stars on the continent, our teams on the continent, and those abroad, and those stories, that there'll be places for us to meet, share, sit around the virtual braai and talk. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and your team.
Absolutely. I'm genuinely looking forward to working with you guys even more. And for me personally, someone who has dedicated so much time to football in general, I'm not saying I find it hard to learn a lot more, but it's been so refreshing to learn even more. Just from our conversations, genuinely, it's been so refreshing. I'm genuinely grateful that you guys accepted our invitation. So yeah, thank you guys, and here's to working together even more.
Amen. Ali, final word to you.
Final word would be, guys, particularly for, I guess, those who follow more Coach's side of things, the Shirtless Plantain Show. Guys, African football is year round. This festival, this party is not a once every 2 years thing. In 2 weeks' time, the CAF Champions League is back. Okay, you want to see some of these guys who've been performing. You want to see Teboho Mokoena. You want to see Peter Shalulule. You want to see some of these guys playing. You want to see Esha Mashur, who is probably Egypt's best player at this tournament. They'll be in action. They'll be playing in the CAF Champions League. We've got the CHAN, the African Cup of Nations for only locally based players coming to Kenya later this year. We've got the Women's AFCON coming later this year. When, we don't know yet, because CAF hasn't got their act together and hasn't told us. But they will be playing. We got the women.
And if you're a fan of Nobali, you definitely have to watch the Premier Soccer League.
The PSL
for Chipper United.
Yeah, let me tell you.
I don't know. Be the equivalent.
Yeah, what I would say is
equivalent to the Premier League, Ali, would be. Who would you say the equivalent of Chipper United would be?
To Chipper, I don't know.
West Ham?
Nottingham. Nah, that's too high. Nottingham Forest, maybe. I don't know.
Nottingham Forest.
I think that
exactly.
someone like that. Yeah, and yeah. So for me, look, follow African football, follow these storylines. Yeah, just watch. If anything, just watch the PSL. There's over 30 of players who are at this tournament playing the PSL. I think 6 goalkeepers. So it's. I think it's even I think maybe the last thing I'll say is even Tanzanian club football. This is a tournament where in the quarterfinals and in the round of 16 in the semifinals, we've seen players from Tanzania. Enoch Banga, Fiston Mayele came off the bench multiple times. Chigui Jara, Mali's starting goalkeeper, playing for Yanga and Simba. So Mabalulu playing in Egypt. So that's all I would say is, guys, African football it's a constant, it's a year-round thing. There's more chaos, there's more beautiful football, there's more wonderful football. And yeah, I just think everyone should get stuck in.
Stories in the world. We haven't even spoken about, I don't know, for those ones to do this, all the Palestinian flags that were waving at the AFCON.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not here taking a stance on whether you agree or whether you like it or wherever you stand, but there's so many strands that come into this. Sorry, go on, Coach.
No, so I definitely stand with Palestine. I also stand with Congo as well. Congo probably made the biggest political statement
with their protest.
With their protest, and I feel like I was a bit disappointed in the broadcast and the fact that it was clearly censored. That was very done in bad. That was done in very bad taste, and it's shocking because it's an African tournament. It shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't be controversial to highlight these things, and they made it controversial, which is incredibly strange. But that's neither here nor there. But just so we're clear on this, like we stand with the plight of the Congolese people, we stand with the plight of the Palestinian people, and injustices everywhere in general. This is to my mind, this is both our platforms are standing on, not sound too self-righteous, but we're standing on the right side of history. I'd like to say, at least, in regards to these things, especially what happened yesterday during the Super Bowl, So yeah, I think it's clear. I think it's very important to highlight this kind of thing.
Well, listen, Coach, always wonderful getting your perspective. Always wonderful hearing from you, Alistair. And as I say, so many important topics that deserve a lot more discussion, debate, and also nuance. And we're happy to provide all of that. Coach, a pleasure having you on. Ali, always good seeing you. Travel safe from Abidjan. Go and take a break. Come back in a little while. You need it. Rest, recover, eat some haggis, whatever you're missing from home. And we'll see you soon.